Michael Harrington had heard threats before. Lawsuits, blackmail, the occasional drunken curse hurled outside his skyscraper office. But nothing chilled him like the small, trembling voice that cut through the crowd that afternoon. "You're in danger." The first time Michael Harrington heard the girl's voice, it sliced through the hum of the city like glass breaking. He had just stepped out of the Waldorf ballroom, his bodyguards flanking him as photographers shouted his name, when the words reached him. "You're in danger." It wasn't loud, but it was sharp, urgent enough to make him stop mid-step. He turned his head toward the source, but the crowd behind him was already shifting and pressing forward, and then he saw her. She couldn't have been more than 8, a thin scrap of a child in a faded pink dress, the kind of color that used to be bright before the sun and the rain had their way with it. Her hair was tangled, her face pale, but her hazel eyes were locked on him with the intensity of someone twice her age. Michael frowned, unsure if he'd heard her right over the clatter of voices and the blinding strobe of camera flashes. His bodyguard, Nate, touched his elbow. "Let's keep moving, sir. Traffic's building." But Michael's gaze stayed on the girl. She was standing utterly still in the chaos, her small hands gripping the strap of a battered canvas bag slung over her shoulder. She looked like she had something else to say, something heavier than those 3 words. But before he could take a step toward her, a city bus rumbled between them. When it passed, she was gone. He scanned the street, ignoring Nate's impatient nudge. "Did you see her?" he asked. "Who?" "The girl. She was right there, about 8, wearing pink." "Sorry, sir, must have blended into the crowd." But Michael couldn't shake the image. That look in her eyes had been too focused, too deliberate. This wasn't the random shout of some kid playing a prank. It felt targeted. As he climbed into the back of the car, he found himself glancing at the sidewalks they passed, half expecting her to appear again. But all he saw were strangers with their own lives, their own hurried footsteps. Still, her words kept echoing in his mind, as if they hadn't been meant for his ears alone, but for something deeper inside him, something he wasn't ready to face. He told himself he'd forget about her by morning. He didn't. That night, Michael lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the city far below. He had tried to work after the gala, reviewing contract proposals and signing off on budget sheets, but his concentration kept drifting back to the girl's voice. He replayed the moment again and again, her stillness in the chaos, her eyes fixed on him like she knew him. Eventually, exhaustion won, and he drifted into a restless sleep. At 3:17 a.m., the building's security alarm shattered the silence. A harsh metallic wail tore through the penthouse, followed by the pounding of footsteps in the hall. Michael jerked upright, heart hammering, fumbling for the phone on his nightstand. Before he could call downstairs, Nate's voice came over the intercom. "Mr. Harrington, stay where you are. We're checking the perimeter." Michael pulled on his robe and stepped into the living room. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Manhattan skyline, serene and glittering, so at odds with the alarm blaring in his ears. He scanned the shadows, looking for movement, but saw nothing. The guards searched every corner of the apartment, even the private elevator shaft. Nothing was broken. No signs of forced entry. "False alarm," Nate reported 20 minutes later, though his jaw was tight. "Could be a system glitch. We'll run diagnostics." Michael nodded, but unease had settled into his bones. He returned to bed, but the room felt different now, as if it had been opened to something unseen. In the morning, the unease deepened. His assistant Claire met him at the office with an envelope. "This came for you by courier," she said, setting it on his desk. It was plain white, no return address. Inside was a single photograph. The image was grainy, taken from across a street, but it was unmistakably him, leaving his office 2 days ago, head down, phone in hand. The part that made his stomach clench was the background. Standing at the edge of the sidewalk, half in shadow, was the same little girl. Her face wasn't blurred. She was looking straight at the camera, almost directly into his eyes through the image. There was nothing else in the envelope. No note, no signature, no explanation. Just that picture. Michael sat back in his chair, the photo resting on the polished wood of his desk, and for the first time in years, he felt the sharp, unmistakable chill of being hunted. 3 days passed, but the photograph never left Michael's desk, or his thoughts. He told himself not to overreact, that the girl was probably just some street kid caught in the frame by accident. Yet every time he looked at her eyes in that picture, he felt the same pulse of unease as he had outside the gala. On the third afternoon, the pressure of the office felt suffocating. He left early, instructing his driver to take him through Central Park, a place he rarely visited. It was late March, the air still carrying a bite, and the trees stood bare except for the first hints of buds. They were rolling past Bethesda Terrace when Michael saw her. She stood by the fountain, her thin shoulders drawn in against the cold, a gray wool scarf wound loosely around her neck. That battered canvas bag was still slung over her shoulder, but now he noticed how worn it really was, the seams fraying, the strap held together with safety pins. Her hair was the same wild tangle. "Stop the car," Michael said sharply. The driver hesitated. "Here, sir?" "Now." Before the vehicle had fully halted, Michael stepped out, ignoring the startled joggers who glanced at him. He walked toward her slowly, not wanting to scare her away. Her eyes found him instantly. She didn't run. "You have to listen," she said quietly, her voice trembling, not from fear of him, but from something else. Urgency, maybe. "They're watching you, and they'll come soon." Michael stopped a few feet away. "Who's they?" But she only shook her head. "I can't say here. It's not safe." The hairs on the back of his neck rose. "Then tell me where we—" The deep growl of an engine cut through his words. A black SUV came around the corner too fast, tires crunching over the park's brick path. It slowed as it neared them, the tinted windows reflecting nothing but pale sky. The girl's eyes widened in panic. Without another word, she spun and bolted into the trees, her small frame vanishing among the trunks with startling speed. Michael turned toward the SUV, but before he could get a clear look at the driver, the vehicle accelerated away, disappearing down the curved path toward the park's exit. For a long moment, he stood there, listening to the fading sound of the engine. The breeze carried the faint smell of gasoline. Somewhere deep inside, a part of him he hadn't used in years, the instinct that had made him a predator in business, whispered one thing: this wasn't coincidence. That night, Michael couldn't shake the image of the SUV's dark windows, or the way the girl had vanished between the trees. He tried to read, tried to answer emails, but his attention frayed within minutes. By midnight he'd poured himself 2 glasses of scotch and was pacing the length of his penthouse living room, the city glittering far below like an indifferent galaxy. At 12:47 a.m. the sound came, a faint click, barely audible over the hum of the HVAC. It was the kind of sound you only noticed if you were already listening for something. Michael froze. The hair along his arms lifted. He moved quietly to the wall-mounted control panel, cycling through the penthouse's security camera feeds. The east balcony, empty. The service elevator, empty. The main corridor outside his door, empty. Then the screen for the back hallway flickered. For half a second there was a shadow where there should have been none. Michael's hand went to the phone, ready to call Nate, when the lights in the living room cut out all at once, plunging him into darkness. The sudden absence of sound, the HVAC gone silent, made his own breathing sound too loud. In the dim glow from the streetlights outside, a figure moved, all in black, face hidden behind a mask, body low and purposeful. The intruder's movements were precise, almost military, the kind that came from training, not desperation. Michael's mind went strangely still. He stepped backward toward his study, where he kept a locked drawer. His fingers had just touched the handle when every alarm in the building erupted at once. A deafening siren blared overhead, the kind that could shatter composure in seconds. The figure spun toward the nearest exit, abandoning whatever plan had brought them there. They sprinted to the service elevator, disappearing as quickly as they had come. Michael didn't move until he heard pounding at the front door. Nate's voice shouted over the alarm. "Mr. Harrington, are you safe?" Police swarmed the apartment minutes later, combing every inch. Nothing was missing. No forced entry. No fingerprints. The cameras had caught only fragments. A shadow, a gloved hand, a blurred silhouette. At 2:15 a.m., when the last officer left, Michael slumped into his desk chair, exhaustion pulling at his muscles. He opened his laptop, intending to review the security logs himself. That's when he saw the new email in his inbox. No subject line, no sender name, just a single initial, L. The message contained one sentence. "You're not safe." Michael sat back, staring at the screen, and felt that same icy thread coil through his chest. Whoever L was, they'd known the attack was coming, and he already suspected who it might be. Michael didn't waste the morning. By the time the sun rose, he had already called Rachel Moore, the one private investigator he trusted enough to handle something this strange. Rachel had worked with him years ago during a corporate embezzlement case, sharp-eyed, relentless, and allergic to small talk. When she arrived at his office, she was in her usual leather jacket and worn jeans, a coffee in one hand and a notepad in the other. "Tell me everything," she said, dropping into the chair across from him. He laid out the sequence: the girl's warning at the gala, the photograph, the second encounter in the park, the SUV, the masked intruder, and the mysterious email signed L. Rachel didn't interrupt, but her pen never stopped moving. When he finished, she looked up. "If L is the girl, then she's not just wandering into your life. She's tracking you, and she's scared enough to risk talking to you in public. That tells me she's either desperate for help or being hunted herself." By late afternoon, Rachel had something. A security camera from a subway station near Central Park had caught the girl running down the steps, less than 5 minutes after she bolted from Michael. Rachel traced her through 3 more cameras, each time moving fast, glancing over her shoulder, until she vanished near a row of warehouses in Queens. "That's not a place a kid hangs out by accident," Rachel said. "And I know someone there who runs a shelter. If she's living rough, she might have ended up there." That evening they drove out to a converted church on the edge of the neighborhood. The shelter smelled faintly of detergent and stale coffee. Folding chairs lined the walls, and the hum of conversation filled the air. A few children darted between the adults, clutching donated toys. In the far corner, half hidden behind a bookshelf, sat the girl. Her scarf was gone now, revealing a small, sharp face with dirt smudged along her cheek. She was curled up on a thin mattress, a paperback in her lap. When she saw Michael, her eyes went wide, not with surprise, but with a kind of resigned recognition, as though she had known he would come eventually. "Lily," said a woman from the shelter staff, kneeling beside her, "these people want to talk to you." The girl, Lily, hesitated, her fingers tightening on the book. Then she set it aside and stood. "I told you they were watching you," she said softly, almost accusingly. Michael crouched so they were at eye level. "Who's they?" She glanced toward the shelter's front door, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Men in the warehouse. I heard them talk about you. They said your name. They said they'd finish what they started." Rachel leaned in. "When was this?" "2 weeks ago. I was sleeping near there. They didn't know I was listening." Michael's chest tightened. "And why warn me? Why not go to the police?" Lily's eyes flicked down. "Because the police don't care about kids like me, and if they find me, I'm dead too." The hum of the shelter seemed to fade. For the first time since this began, Michael felt the edges of the threat closing in, not just around him, but around this small, stubborn girl who had chosen to warn him anyway. Michael didn't sleep that night. After leaving the shelter, he sat in his penthouse study with a legal pad in front of him, drawing lines between names, locations, and scraps of information. The warehouse in Queens, the masked intruder, the SUV, Lily's whispered warning, it all fit together, but like a puzzle with a piece missing in the center. By mid-morning, Rachel called with an update. She'd done a sweep of the industrial district Lily had mentioned. Most of the warehouses were empty shells or legitimate businesses, but one, an abandoned shipping facility with its windows painted black, stood out. No company name, no signage. The property records traced back to a shell corporation registered offshore. "That's our place," Rachel said. "But if we go in quiet. If Lily's right, they're already planning something." Michael insisted on coming along. Rachel didn't like it, but she also knew there was no talking him out of it. At dusk, they parked 2 blocks away and approached on foot, weaving through alleys that smelled of rust and wet asphalt. The warehouse loomed ahead, its corrugated walls streaked with decades of grime. A sliver of yellow light glowed from one high window. Rachel found a side door with a lock so cheap it practically begged to be picked. 2 minutes later they slipped inside. The air was stale, thick with dust and the faint tang of oil. Their footsteps were swallowed by the cavernous space. Stacks of wooden crates formed crooked walls, creating narrow corridors that smelled faintly of mold. Somewhere deeper inside, a faint murmur of voices carried through the gloom. They moved toward the sound, careful to keep in the shadows. Through a gap between crates, Michael saw them. 3 men gathered around a folding table, their faces lit by the glow of a single work lamp. The table was cluttered with papers, blueprints, and what looked like a set of building access cards. Rachel motioned for him to stay low. They edged closer until the voices became words. Harrington's schedule hasn't changed," one man said, tapping a sheet of paper. "April 12th, he's back at the penthouse after the gala. We'll be ready. April 12th. Michael felt a cold weight settle in his chest. That was tomorrow. Another man leaned over the table. "We hit fast, no mistakes. In and out before his security knows what's happening." Rachel's eyes met Michael's in the dark, her expression hard. She mouthed one word: proof. They pulled out their phones, snapping silent photos of the table, the blueprints, the men's faces. Michael's gaze drifted across the whiteboard on the far wall, and his breath caught. There was his name, underlined twice, with a red circle drawn around tomorrow's date. Beneath it, a single word scrawled in block letters: FINISH. As they backed away, a faint scrape echoed from somewhere behind them. One of the men looked up, frowning. Rachel grabbed Michael's sleeve. "Move, now." They slipped out the side door just as the voices inside grew sharper, the scrape of chairs against concrete following them into the night. When they reached the car, Michael's hands were shaking. He forced them still against his knees. "Tomorrow," he said quietly. "They're coming tomorrow." Rachel started the engine. "Then tonight we make sure they walk into a trap." The hours leading up to April 12th felt like a fuse burning towards something inevitable. Michael's penthouse, usually a sanctuary of polished wood and glass, had been transformed into a controlled battlefield. Every window and hallway was wired with motion sensors. The building's security team had doubled their presence, and the NYPD had set up a covert operations post 2 floors below. Rachel took charge of the setup. She moved through the space like she'd been preparing for this all her life, checking comms, testing cameras, and drilling the plainclothes officers on their positions. The plan was simple in theory. Let the intruders think Michael was alone and unprotected. Lure them inside, and shut every exit at once. But Michael knew from experience that simple in theory was where plans went to die. By late evening, the city was a glittering sea of lights outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. Michael sat in the living room wearing the same dark suit he'd worn at the gala, pretending to read while earpiece chatter hummed in the background. Rachel's voice cut in now and then, calm but razor-focused. At 11:52 p.m., one of the perimeter watchers spoke. "Black SUV approaching South Side, 3 occupants." Michael's pulse kicked up. "Copy that," Rachel replied. "Everyone hold positions. No engagement until they're inside." Through the dimmed glass, Michael saw them. 3 figures in tactical black, masks pulled tight, moving with the precision of people who'd done this before. They bypassed the front entrance entirely, heading straight for the service elevator, a route Michael had deliberately left less secure to bait them in. The elevator's cameras caught them riding up in silence, each holding compact submachine guns. "Stand by," Rachel's voice murmured. "They're on your floor." The penthouse door eased open without a sound. The intruders slipped inside, fanning out exactly as they had in the warehouse blueprints. One moved toward the kitchen, another toward the study, while the third advanced on the living room where Michael sat, still pretending to read. Michael kept his breathing even, forcing himself not to look directly at the man approaching. "Now," Rachel ordered. Every light in the penthouse exploded to full brightness. At the same instant, steel shutters slammed down over the windows with a hydraulic hiss, sealing off the room from the outside world. The hallway behind the intruders filled with the pounding of boots as officers surged in. The first man spun toward the sound, raising his weapon, but a taser dart hit him square in the chest before he could fire. The second tried to retreat toward the service elevator, only to find it locked and guarded. The third, the one closest to Michael, lunged forward, maybe thinking to take him hostage, but two NYPD officers tackled him to the ground in a brutal tangle of limbs. It was over in less than 30 seconds. As the masked men were hauled to their feet, one of the officers yanked off the leader's hood. Michael's stomach dropped. He knew that face. Thomas Grant. Once his business partner, now a ruin of the man he'd known. Eyes full of a venom that made it clear this night wouldn't have been the end for Michael, but the beginning of something much worse. Grant spat on the floor. "You took everything from me? You think you can hide behind money forever?" Michael didn't answer. He didn't need to. The handcuffs clicked shut and the officers dragged the men away. Rachel stepped up beside him, her expression unreadable. "You're lucky the kid warned you," she said quietly. "Without her, tonight might have gone very differently." Michael nodded, but his mind was already somewhere else, back at the shelter, to a thin girl with hazel eyes who had seen this coming when no one else had. The next morning, the city was waking up to headlines about the foiled assassination attempt on real estate mogul Michael Harrington. News vans idled outside his building, reporters shouting questions into microphones as if the glass facade might give them answers. Michael ignored them. He had somewhere more important to be. Rachel drove. The sky was overcast, the kind of pale gray that softened the edges of the skyline. Neither of them spoke much on the way, though Rachel kept glancing at him like she could tell his mind wasn't on the arrests, the charges, or even Thomas Grant's bitter face. It was on Lily. The shelter was quieter than before. A handful of volunteers were stacking crates of canned food near the entrance, their laughter faint against the echo of the old church's high ceiling. When Michael stepped inside, the woman at the front desk looked up in mild surprise. "She's in the reading room," she said before he could ask. Michael found Lily curled up in a beanbag chair, a heavy hardcover balanced on her knees. She didn't look up until his shadow fell across the page. When she saw him, her brow furrowed like she was bracing for bad news. "It's over," Michael said. "The men who were after me, they won't be coming back." She studied him for a long moment, as if weighing the truth of his words. "You caught them?" He nodded. "Because of you." For the first time, a flicker of something other than guardedness crossed her face. Not quite a smile, more like relief she didn't want to admit. "You could have just walked away that night," Michael continued. "You didn't. You warned me, even though it put you in danger." She shrugged, eyes dropping back to her book. "Didn't seem right, letting someone get hurt if I could stop it." Michael crouched down so they were at the same level. "I want to make sure no one ever puts you in danger again. That means a real home, school, people who care about what happens to you. I can give you that." Her small fingers tightened around the book's edges. "You mean live with you?" "I mean be family." She didn't answer right away. He could see the gears turning behind her eyes, the kind of calculation only a child who's had to survive alone would make. Finally she closed the book, the sound of it snapping shut loud in the quiet room. "Families don't always last," she said softly. "I know," Michael admitted, "but we can make this one last." Something in his voice must have reached her because she gave a single small nod. Not a leap of faith, but the first step toward one. 2 weeks later they stood in a small courtroom where a judge read the adoption order. Lily wore a new coat, her hair neatly brushed, but her eyes were still the same sharp hazel that had stopped him in his tracks outside the gala. As they stepped into the hallway afterward, she looked up at him. "I told you you were in danger," she said. Michael smiled faintly. "You were right." She shook her head. "Maybe I was wrong. Maybe the danger wasn't someone trying to hurt you. Maybe it was you never having someone who cared." And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Michael laughed. Not the polite, hollow sound he gave at charity dinners, but a deep, warm laugh that came from somewhere real. The sound startled even him. They walked out into the pale winter sunlight together, and for once, the city didn't feel like a battleground. It felt like a beginning. To me, the ending of this story works because it delivers a payoff that's both emotional and thematically consistent. Throughout the chapters, Michael's arc isn't just about survival. It's about transformation. He begins as a man defined by wealth, isolation, and the belief that problems can be managed like business deals. The assassination plot forces him into contact with someone who has nothing but instinct and courage, and that contrast strips away his usual armor. Lily, on the other hand, starts as a wary survivor who trusts no one. Her warnings are acts of bravery, but also of desperation. She's fighting the idea that she's invisible to the world. The moment she accepts Michael's offer of a home is powerful precisely because she doesn't give it lightly. It's a fragile victory for trust itself. What I especially like is that the final twist of her words reframes the entire story. The danger wasn't just physical, it was emotional stagnation, the risk of never finding connection. The happy ending doesn't feel cheap because it's earned through risk, loss, and the messy vulnerability of two people deciding to believe in each other. If I were to sum it up, the bullets missed their mark, but the story still hit exactly where it should, right in the heart.